Okay, my name is Lizel Ramos. I'm a program administrator at the Agency for Persons with Disabilities in Tallahassee, and I work in the area related to application, eligibility determination, intake, waiver enrollment, waiting list, and in my area we also have several specialty programs such as supported living, transportation, and supported employment. And with me today, I have Maria Gores. She's also with the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, but she works in our regional office in Orlando. And I asked her to join me today because it's always very helpful to hear feedback and input from regional staff who are,
we'll share this.
You know, they're the ones who have our face-to-face contact with our clients. Did everybody get a copy of the presentation?
I think we're out now.
Oh, we're out. I think there's some still over there.
There's one. There's one.
Okay.
Uno más.
If you didn't get one, I have my business card. I'll be happy to give it to you, and I'll send it to you by email. Okay? Okay, and Maria can share hers, if anybody would like to have hers. Okay, so today I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot of material to cover, and I want to make sure we have time also to answer questions. In the end, if we don't have time to answer every question, again, I'm going to pull out my business cards in a little bit, and I'll put them in the bag. You feel free to grab one, and feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. You also know that we have some cards, and I'm positive they have shared in other sessions where you can always write your questions in there and hand them to the staff, and they'll make sure that they send them to our agency. Today we're going to talk about the application for services within our agency, the eligibility determination process, our waiting list priority categories, our iBudget waiver enrollment process, and these listed in here are the ways in which someone can enroll on the waiver once someone has been determined eligible for services and placed on our waiting list. If they meet one of these criteria here, and I'll go over them in a little bit, then they can enroll on the waiver.
Do you have another handout?
I'm sorry, we just ran out of them.
All right, thanks.
But I'm going to put my business card back there in a minute. Feel free to grab one, okay. And I'll be happy to email them to you, okay? There's one more. I think there's someone just coming in right now, maybe. Okay. If you want to know where to go find an application for services, that's the website right there, apdcares.org. You click on customers and scroll down to application, and you can find our application for services in there. It is available in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. It is divided in several different sections, and those sections are labeled. It shows you which sections you get to fill out and which sections the regional office staff will get to fill out. They verify some information, and then they fill out those sections in there. So our application for services may be accepted from a parent, a court-appointed guardian of a minor child, a legally competent adult, or an authorized legal representative. Applicants under the age of 18 need to have their parent or legal representative sign the application for them. We cannot accept an application that hasn't been signed. Right now, the only way to apply is by getting a copy of the application, which you can get by mail. You can call the regional office and they can email it to you, or you can download it yourself. You can fill it out and you can send it in to your regional office. In the same place where you find the application, you'll find a map of Florida, and you can click on the region or the area where you reside, and it'll give you the name, address, phone number of the people that you can send the application to. For applicants 18 years of age or older, they must sign the application unless they have been determined incapacitated by a court of law, or unless they have asked someone else to exercise his rights in writing. And an adult who's unable to sign the application can just simply make a mark, and someone can just verify that that is the person's mark. So, once a fully complete and signed application has been received, the agency will review to determine if additional information is needed. Basically, when you submit an application, you need to fill out all the detailed information that is in there, such as name, of course, date of birth, address, primary DD diagnosis, and then it'll indicate which are the diagnoses that we serve. And we'll go over that in just a minute. And then any type of secondary diagnosis, any mental health diagnosis, primary caregiving information, whether or not the person is a dependent of an active duty military service member that was transferred to the state of Florida. And I'll tell you in a little bit why that's relevant. Information about the person who's assisting the applicant, services that are requested, and you don't have to worry very much about that. A lot of times when you apply for services, you're not real sure what services you need, but you know you need services, and that's okay. And of course, we need to have identity verification, legal status, if the child is in community-based care. Basically, that means if the child is a foster child. Yeah, you don't have to worry if you, the question is if the birth certificate is in Spanish, you don't have to really worry about that. You can submit the birth certificate, but then you would have to submit other identifying information that would indicate that that's, oh yeah, definitely, if you have a US passport, that's, yeah. Citizenship verification information is also necessary. In order to be eligible to receive services from the state of Florida, you have to be domiciled and a legal resident of Florida, so you have to show proof of that. Whether or not there have been any assessments conducted before, or if you wish to request an assessment be conducted. And then you sign, and that's about it. And I'm gonna go over the type of supplemental information that we will need in order to determine eligibility in just a minute. Examples of the types of documents needed when submitting an application for services. So we look at standardized IQ tests, and that of course is if you're applying under the eligibility criteria of intellectual disability. If that's what you're applying for, there is a certain standard and requirements that must be met, and you need to submit the documentation that show that the person has an intellectual disability with an IQ of 70 or less. Or tests of adaptive functioning, and those are necessary because in order, we don't just need the IQ test, we also need to see the adaptive functioning of the individual. Any other type of diagnostic evaluations that you have that have been done in the past, whether it's been at school or psychological evaluations, any type of information that you already have at the time that you're applying, it is in the best interest of the applicant to go ahead and submit it at that time. Yes?
Does it matter how old?
It doesn't matter how old. the more recent, the better. But if, whatever you have at the time that you're applying, you should submit. And in some cases, such as Phelan-McDermott syndrome or some of the other syndromes that are eligible for services, we will need documentation from medical doctors or genetic testing, school records, and psychological evaluations. But if you have other type of documents not listed here, feel free to submit them as well. Examples of types of documents, also, of course, birth certificate, resident alien card, state driver's license, a military dependence ID card, the applicant's original social security card. All of this is necessary, of course, because we need to make sure that this is the person that you say that, they are. We have 45 days to respond and make a determination of eligibility for children under the age of 6 and over. We have 60 days to respond in writing, but if we need additional information, we have up to 90 days from the day the signed application was received. Sometimes, I'm here to tell you, sometimes it takes a bit longer than that, depending on the type of documentation that is needed. But for the most part, we try to meet those deadlines as much as we can. Yes, ma'am?
So when you send in the documentation, we actually have to send the original?
No, you can send copies.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely copies. No, we don't need the original Social Security card. I mean, if you bring it, the original Social Security card, all we need is a copy of that.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
When you submit the application, you should submit all that paperwork all at once?
It's better if you do. The question is, when you submit the application, do you submit all of it at once? If you have it all at the moment that you're submitting the application, go ahead and submit it all. If you're waiting on, a summary or results of a evaluation or something, but you have most of everything, you can submit what you have, but if what you're waiting for is critical to determining eligibility, then we won't be able to render a determination until that information has been received.
And the IQ test, because I don't even remember my daughter having it, because she's 14, but she's like a 20-year-old baby. So how do I have to go and take a test or?
If you don't have an IQ test, the agency can order one.
Okay.
We can order one. If you haven't had one done, they can. If that's what you're applying for, if you're applying for under the diagnosis of intellectual disability, we need to have an IQ test because the cutoff is 70, an IQ of 70, plus significant deficits in other areas as well. So that's not just the only thing that we're looking for. We're looking for that plus other things.
Like she does under cerebral palsy.
If it's cerebral palsy, then we need documentation from a physician or a doctor. If that's the what you're applying under, and then yes.
If the IQ test, the 70, like say the nonverbal is above 70, but the verbal is below, and the combined brings it a little bit above the 70.
Yeah.
Is that
Well,
what you look
we
at
have-
combined, or do you look at?
The cutoff is 70, but that doesn't mean that if the person has an IQ of 72, that they won't be determined eligible, because we're not just looking at the IQ, we're looking at the IQ plus we're looking also at their adaptive functioning as well. We're looking at how well they can take care of their own personal needs, and there's a lot more than we're looking at than just the IQ.
And what
Yes.
type of doctor does that, the adaptive functioning test?
That type of test comes with the psychological evaluation, and you will usually find that in the school records.
Oh, okay.
It is most of the time is with the psychological evaluation
Oh, okay.
or the psychoeducation from the school.
From a neuropsychologist.
Right, neuropsychology.
So
So
Any
if
other
their
questions?
IEP states their IQ, would that be sufficient, or you want the
We need the
original
actual
report?
IQ test.
The actual
Mhm.
report, okay.
Yeah. Which, if the IEP says that they have an IQ of such and such, that means that an IQ test must have been done at some point. Otherwise, they wouldn't know what IQ to put in the IEP. So in addition to the disability requirements, we also look at the fact that the person is at least 3 years of age or older. They're a resident of and domiciled in the state of Florida, and they have a confirmed diagnosis of a developmental disability. And I'll go over the types of developmental disabilities that we serve, and here they are. Intellectual disability with a full-scale IQ of 70 or below, cerebral palsy, severe forms of autism, spina bifida, Down syndrome, Phelan-McDermid syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, and all of these must be manifested prior to the age of 18, and they must all constitute a substantial handicap that can reasonably be expected to continue indefinitely. So I think where this right here is where sometimes not everyone realizes that that's there, that that's in our statute. That in order to determine someone eligible for services, not only must they have a diagnosis of intellectual disability, autism, Prader-Willi, Down syndrome, but they also, this disability must show a substantial handicap that can reasonably be expected to continue indefinitely. For the most part, it does, but sometimes we need to get some additional documentation that clearly shows their adaptive functioning, and there's more than just a diagnosis for one of the disabilities. In other words, we don't follow the same diagnostic criteria as the DSM, diagnosis that a psychologist would use.
Can you apply under two, like, if you place my daughter in intellectual disability or palsy, you gotta pick one or the other?
Yes, you can apply under two, any two developmental disabilities. If you have an intellectual disability, that's usually considered the primary diagnosis. But if you have like autism and cerebral palsy, you can use the one that is more severe, if you can determine which one. If not, it doesn't matter. But if they have an intellectual disability, that would be the primary diagnosis.
What if the diagnosis wasn't until just after they were 18?
Okay, that's a very good question. Did everybody hear that question? We get that a lot. And what happens when an official diagnosis of a developmental disability occurs after the age of 18, we have to look at the totality of the information that's submitted, of all the documentations. At that point, we have to determine the likelihood that the person had that disability prior to the age of 18. We need to look perhaps at school records, historical information from their family and relatives, any other type of information that can help the agency make a determination that this person really did have the disability prior to the age of 18. What we have to be real careful with is sometimes if someone has a stroke, say for instance, after the age of 18, and the stroke results in symptoms that appear to be intellectual disability in nature, if the disability occurred after the age of 18, they're not eligible for services. So that's why we have to be real careful at reviewing the totality of the documentation that's submitted for review, so that we can make a good determination and determine the likelihood, of the disability occurring prior to the age of 18. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add on your question of can we apply for two separate disabilities, And in many cases that I have seen, the parents want to apply for under autism, but they do not have those diagnostic, those assessment, CARS, ADOS, they don't have that. But the child may have intellectual disabilities. So if they provide that psychological evaluation with the IQ test scores, then even though, yes, indeed, he may have autism, well, he may qualify under intellectual disabilities. So if that is the situation, the best thing to do is to submit those documentation.
Well, my confusion is because she has cerebral palsy, but, you know, there's everything else, and then she has some intellectual disability. But I had heard like it was actually better to do it under cerebral palsy, but you're saying that it's better to do it under intellectual disability. I just want to make sure that, do I put both of them, or just I have to pick either or?
No, you put both.
You put
If
both.
she has an intellectual disability, you would put both. For intellectual disability, we have to consider that the primary. So if she has cerebral palsy and intellectual disability, we will need the IQ tests that show the IQ of 70 or less.
Sorry,
Yes, it's
if you
okay.
have two kids with autism, should you put both their stuff in the same envelope when you send it in?
Pardon me?
I have two children with autism, so
Oh, okay.
should I send their stuff together or should it be separate?
Oh, no, you can send it all together in one
Okay.
packet, as long as, both packet,
Right, they're
Yeah.
in there
Yeah.
but separate, yeah.
yeah, they're two separate applications.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. So we would be processing each separately.
Right.
But yeah, there's nothing to require you to send them in separately.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so establishing eligibility for intellectual disability, we're looking at significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning, significant deficits in adaptive functioning. We're looking at documentation that it manifested prior to the age of 18. It can reasonably be expected to continue indefinitely with an IQ test of a score of 70 or below. That's wrong. With a score below 70, no, it's 70 or below. Sorry about that. And adaptive tests from a licensed psychologist. For cerebral palsy, so basically we're looking at results, documentation that shows that this was a result from damage to the developing brain, results in the loss or impairment of control over voluntary muscles. Again, this does not include symptoms or impairments resulting solely from a stroke. And the diagnosis is confirmed by medical records, and it must show that it occurred prior to the age of 18. With cerebral palsy, it does. Autism. We're looking at forms of autism that are pervasive, neurologically based, of extended duration, and persons who have severe learning, communication, and behavior disorders. And this is where the adaptive tests are so important, is because there are specific measures and specific criteria that our psychologists and our staff look for when an application comes in under the category of autism. And of course, the age of onset has to be during infancy or childhood. And the diagnosis is made by a licensed psychiatrist, psychologist, neurologist, or developmental pediatrician. And for spina bifida, the diagnosis is made by a medical doctor or doctor of osteopathy, and medical records showing that the diagnosis occurred prior to the age of 18. Down syndrome, we require medical records documenting a chromosome analysis. There isn't always a chromosome analysis, we understand that. So we do accept prenatal diagnostic tests and information from a physician indicating that the person has a diagnosis of Down syndrome. They can make a diagnosis. Okay. For Phelan-McDermott syndrome, again, this is also a medical physician that provides the diagnosis of Phelan-McDermid, usually derived from genetic testing. Prader-Willi syndrome, pretty much the same. We need a written confirmed diagnosis from a medical doctor, and records that document that the diagnosis was made prior to the age of 18. We also have a category of high risk, and this is specific just for children between the ages of 3 and 5 who show symptoms of high risk of developing a developmental disability. These individuals, these children, are not eligible to receive services through our home and community-based services waiver. So only people who have a confirmed diagnosis of a developmental disability can receive services from the waiver, but there is a separate pool of funds that provide early type of services for children who are who meet this category, who meet this criteria. If by the age of 5 the child hasn't had a confirmed diagnosis of a developmental disability, we need to close their record. In other words, they're no longer eligible for services from the agency. After the age of 5, then unless they have a confirmed diagnosis, then we have to close them. Okay, so once a person is determined eligible for services, they have met the criteria under one of the intellectual disability, autism, Phelan-McDermid, or any of the other developmental disabilities, most likely the person will go on a waiting list for services. Currently, we serve over 30,000 people on our home and community-based services waiver, and we have a waiting list of over 21,000 people. And there is really no specific time from the time someone goes on the waiting list to the time they actually begin receiving services. It's all contingent upon the availability of funds and the waiting list priority category, and whether or not the legislature appropriates specific funds for individuals on the waiting list on any given year. The waiting list pretty much hovers over 21,100, 21,200, and goes up and down. And the reason is because people do enroll on the waiver, and I will go over the enrollment criteria. So some of them end up enrolling, but it just fluctuates right there between 21,100 and 21,200. It stays right there. It has stayed like that for the last couple of years. I want to say in 2015 through 2017, 2014 to 2017, we did receive additional funds to get individuals, get people off the waiting list. The funds were enough to offer waiver services to like 2,000 people per year. But not everybody that was offered ended up enrolling for many reasons. But again, so in those instances, it may have gone down to 20,000, maybe even 19,000, but then it crawls back up. Individuals who meet the Category 1 criteria, those are the individuals who are in crisis. In order to be determined to be in crisis, a person must be homeless, danger to self or others. In other words, their behaviors are such that they place themselves at risk or the people around them at risk, or their caregiver is no longer able to provide care to the individual, whether it be illness or age or whatever the reason may be. If the caregiver is no longer able to provide care and they can show that they can no longer be able to provide care, they would meet that crisis criteria, and then the person would be eligible to receive services through the waiver.
I just wanted to add on the individual being client being a danger to self and others. That will require a lot of not just misbehavior. It will require like arrest, police records, Baker Acts, and everything that was tried to avoid or to better the behavior, but did not work. We will need to have that. Some parents may send evidence of pictures of the damage that they have done to furniture, to the walls, or we need to have also the medical records if they end up in the emergency room, or the parent end up, or caregiver end up in the emergency room due to injurious behavior. But so it's not just you know the bad behavior. Some parents call and say, well, he slapped me, or something like that, or he pushed his sister. That's not enough.
Yeah, that's, yes.
I just have a question. Different states, I believe, have different categories for criteria.
Yeah.
What if they qualified in another state under epilepsy and they move here? How does that all work?
That's a great question. Medicaid waivers are different from one state to another. Basically, it's a contract that that state has with the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and it only applies to that state. So yes, the criteria may differ from one state to another, and that reminds me also that a lot of people move to Florida from the northern states because we have such a great weather. And in situations like that, where they received services in another state, they think that because they were receiving waiver services over there, that it would automatically translate to Florida. And a lot of times they end up getting here and going on a waiting list. When they call, you know, I personally have talked to people who call from Michigan, say, or other states. I don't ever say, don't come, or yes, come. I mean, that it's not up to me. Obviously, it's a very personal decision. But what I do say is, you know, you need to know that when you get to the state of Florida, first he needs to go through the application eligibility determination criteria, and if he meets the eligibility criteria of Florida, he may end up on a waiting list. And they have to, you know, weigh the pros and the cons and make their own decisions. Thank you, that was a good question. Anybody else? Okay, so the children in category 2, these are basically children who are in the foster care system and who have reached permanency. In other words, they have been adopted or reunified, and you know, there's an agreement that once they meet this criteria, they would go straight from foster care to receiving waiver services. Category 3 is close to category 1, but not quite, you know, hasn't reached that level of intensity. So, you know, the person, the caregiver will be unable to provide care within the next 12 months. They have a planned surgery or a planned something, and they will no longer be able to provide care, or the person will soon be leaving a mental health hospital or skilled nursing facility. So while they're at the mental health hospital or skilled nursing facility, they cannot be on the waiver. But we know that they're there. We put them in category 3. We know the moment that they step out, then it will most likely end up as a transition into the waiver. Category 4, individuals whose caregivers are 70 years of age or older. Category 5 are pretty much individuals who are getting ready to graduate from high school within the next 12 months. They go into category 5. And the important thing about making sure, if you apply, if your son or daughter is on the waiting list, making sure that they're on the right category, is that if the legislature appropriates funds any particular year, most of the time what they do is they say for people who are in categories 3, 4, and 5, or for people who are in category 6, or, you know, 3, 4, and 6, which is pretty much what they did in the last several years. So, you have to make sure that if your son or daughter is on the waiting list, that they are on the correct waiting list priority category. And all this information is on our website at apdcares.org. There's a document that describes each of the waiting list priority categories. You can access that information in there. Category 6 is everyone 21 years of age or older who don't meet any of the other priority categories, and 7, same for children under the age of 21. Any questions about the waiting list priority categories?
When you apply, do they tell you what category?
Yes. When you apply, once you're determined eligible for services, the notice, it's a eligibility notice, will basically tell you you're eligible for APD services under the category of, autism or whatever, and you're being placed on category, waiting list priority category such and such.
Of the 21,000, how many are in category 7?
Oh, I don't know that by memory. I wouldn't be able to tell you that.
I'm just wondering if 20,000 are in category 7.
No, actually, the majority are category 6, if my memory doesn't fail me. Yes, ma'am.
If you're in category 7 when you apply, and then it's a year later, and do they automatically move you to category 6 if you turn?
Yeah, we do. We run data off our waiting list priority categories, and then we change it. But you should receive a notice that tells you you've been changed from category 7 to 6. If you don't get a notice, call your regional office and make sure that we change the category.
Okay.
The categories of 1 to 7, is the priority 1,
The
that's
most
how the
intense.
order it goes? Or
Yeah.
it has nothing to do?
No, they are in
there?
order of need.
So
in order
you'll
of-
always, be on category 7 till she turns 21, basically?
unless, the caregiver turns 70 years of age, then she goes to category 4, or unless, she meets the criteria for category 3, or whatever the case may
Who
be.
presents that information? Is it up to the parent or that
Yes.
caregiver to submit that information?
Yes,
Should
absolutely.
things change?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really very important for you to keep the agency updated on any types of changes. So if you've had a life situation, a circumstances in your individual's life that has changed, that basically has placed them into crisis or something like that, by all means, contact your regional office, let them know, and request a change in priority category. In some cases, some instances, we may request some documentation to show proof of whatever, but yeah, please make sure that you keep us updated. Yes, I'm sorry. I'll come back to you. Yes.
My in-laws have passed away in the last few years. We've taken over the care of my brother-in-law, who is autistic and intellectually disabled.
That's definitely a change in life circumstance.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
But we do not have any, we've looked through all the paperwork. There's nothing to prove that this occurred before the age of 18.
That's okay.
Okay.
Has he ever applied for services?
No, they didn't
Okay.
apply for services.
How old is he?
54.
Okay.
No, sorry, 57.
Okay, that's fine. That happens. We have cases where parents took care of their loved one, of their son or daughter, until the age of 80. They passed away, and they took care of them all of their lives. In many cases, they never went to school. So, yes, make sure you apply for services in the regional office that that he resides in. And in a situation like that, you submit whatever documentation you have available. If there haven't been any type of tests, the agency can order tests for him, adaptive tests, psychological tests, and in addition to that, what they'll do is they'll look again at the totality of information, and they'll talk to the family and look at historical information and any type of documentation that you may be able to have, maybe medical records, or I don't know if he went to school and they still have any of that. Long ago, I know, and that probably doesn't even exist anymore. But whatever documentation they do have, definitely go ahead and apply. And
What kind of category would that put him in?
well, it's very hard for me to say.
I know.
It depends on his needs. Clearly, it sounds to me like there's issues with caregiver at this point since the primary caregivers have since passed away. So
We have 2 other children with disabilities at home, so it's.
you may actually, be able to apply through crisis, due to caregiver unable. But again, I'm just saying, I've only heard 2 sentences, so it all depends on the totality of the information. But yeah, but you do need to
So gather
apply.
what I can and go
Yes,
from
yeah. He might, I don't know, he might be able to be under category 3. I don't know. Yeah, it sounds to me like
Which county do you live in?
Martin County.
that's close to St. Lucie?
Yes, just south of St. Louis.
Okay, so that would be central, right? Or southeast?
Southeast.
Southeast, probably. Okay, but yeah.
Most everything in Martin County kind of gets lumped with Palm Beach and.
Okay, then it would be the southeast region. And if you want to stop by after the session, we'll give you more information as to where to call and who to see and who to talk to. Yeah. Yes.
So my question is, when you say apply, like you just said, you're gonna apply for a crisis, or you're in category 6 and you wanna apply, you think you're eligible for 3.
Okay.
When you say apply, do you mean put in a paper application?
No,
You're an
I'm sorry.
application, or do you write a letter?
When you
or-
apply for services, that's when you initially apply for services. You go onto our website, apdcares.org. To move from a one category to another, you call the regional office and you say, look, we've had a change in life circumstances or in age. He's no longer in category 7, he should be in category 6, or 5 if he's getting ready to graduate from high school within the next 12 months. That type of detail makes a huge, big difference in the type of category that he or she may be in. A call will do. You have to make sure, though, that you receive a notice, a written notice, that confirms that you have been changed from this category to that category. That's how it is documented. That's how you know it's been documented, and we have changed it in our system. We have a database where that needs to be changed. It's important because when we pull data, when the legislature says, I'm appropriating funds for you to go offer waiver services to everybody in category 5, you have to make sure.
Who are you calling?
Your regional office, there's when you go on our website, you click on the regional office for your region, and it'll show you right there the names and phone numbers and contact information. You call your regional office at that point.
Should we go physically, like, take the paperwork and say, to make sure that we have everything that we're.
You
doing
can.
And stuff, is that okay?
Yeah.
Instead of mailing it and then waiting 60 days to get a letter, hey, you were missing such a paper.
Does that help?
It's okay, it helps, but I would suggest, whatever changes you want
I
to
can't hear
the
her.
agency, sorry, whatever changes you want the agency to do and review the case, you have to write a letter explaining exactly what you need. If you're requesting crisis, you have to write a letter explaining in details. So anyone that will read the letter will see the crisis, will see the situation, and attach to that letter the documents to support your request. If you're changing because of age or medical condition of the caregiver, make sure you attach something with the date of birth, something legal, some medical documentation, if it's for medical reasons. You attach that, not just the letter. The letter will be good, just to give us an idea of what is the request, but the supporting documentation will be the proof of what you are requesting.
Another question. and
Yes.
This is like very Mary's situation right now. So besides my daughter now, we've got our parents with Alzheimer's, dementia. We have trying to take care of both of them, which has created duress for us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Alzheimer's and dementia and all this stuff would enter because you said they had to have it before they were 18.
Yeah, no, we
But-
do not serve people
Okay,
with Alzheimer's.
But as far as like us having to, besides having my daughter's special needs, even though my parents aren't not living with me physically, my time is
You're responsible for their care or, yeah.
spread all apart. Would that
Yeah.
put us in category one in that situation, or would that still be?
It depends, it depends. I mean, the category, it's your daughter, once you apply and she's determined eligible for services, you have to explain, you know, the situation, document it, and depending on the circumstances, if they meet the criteria that, you know, we talked about, then she would go under that category. Again, it's very detailed, and the more information you can provide to prove, like Maria was just saying, it's very beneficial to show, you know, what type of waiting list priority categories you can go in.
Can you apply
Okay.
as many times as you want?
You can. Can you apply as many times as you want? Yes, you can. If you've been determined ineligible for services, you can always apply again if you have additional documentation that you didn't have when you first applied. You know, and that happens. That does happen. Okay, we have 15 minutes, so let's see if I can get through. These are the different types of waiver enrollment criteria. A person who has been determined to be in crisis, meaning that they are homeless, danger to self or others, or the caregiver is no longer able to provide care for them, that they're in foster care and have reached permanency. The waiting list to waiver offers, that's what we referred to earlier in 2014 through 2017, I think it was. We received special appropriation for that. We haven't in the last 2 years. Dependents of active duty military service members, and so these would be, we have a special criteria for active duty military service members who are transferred to the state of Florida, who have a son or a daughter with a developmental disability, and who received waiver services in the state they transferred from. You know, they can also go on the waiver when they arrive in Florida. Individuals who are currently in an ICF, and that would be an intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disabilities, or individuals in skilled nursing facilities, if they choose to transition from the ICF or the skilled nursing facility to the community and begin receiving waiver services, they can also enroll on the waiver and not have to go into the waiting list. And individuals with Phelan-McDermid syndrome, if they apply and they can show that the person has Phelan-McDermid syndrome, they do not have to go on the waiting list, they automatically go on the waiver. Oh, okay. I was afraid I was gonna leave something out there. Okay, do you have any other questions? I have, yes, ma'am.
I have a parent that she got kicked off the waiting list. Plus she was like near 70, and I don't know, she couldn't really tell us why. I don't know if she didn't respond to a letter. I mean, you contact them every year,
Yeah?
so maybe that's why she got kicked off, because she didn't, I know she speaks Spanish,
Okay.
so I don't know.
If, you know, she can call the regional office and find out, I'll be happy to talk to her if you want me to, I can. Yeah, we do send out annual letters to persons who are on the waiting list, and we need to receive a response from them. If we don't, we will attempt several other times to contact them, and if we can't reach them, we may end up closing the case due to loss of contact.
But there's attempts.
Yeah, there should be several attempts, they have to be documented and all of that. So if her case was closed, she
She
can,
reapplied.
she must, oh, she did reapply?
Because she was told the case was closed.
Okay, so she's now back on the waiting list, or we don't know yet?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. Well, again, I have my business card, if anybody would like to, do you have anything else to add?
No, I was just gonna say that, when we, not only, if you don't receive the annual status review, we normally send it in Central Region, we all normally send it between March and June. We send those letters. So if you are on the waiting list and you haven't received that letter, call the agency and find out and say, I haven't received the annual status review form. Or if you change your telephone number or you move, you have to let the agency know. Because we will go by the last known address and last known number, and we will try to reach you. And if we cannot find you, we will mail you the letter. We get that letter back, return to sender. We go back in the file, we check for the telephone number, we call you, we call other contacts that you have named and mentioned on the application. And if we cannot find you after several attempts, then there's nothing we can do, because we don't know if you move out of state or if you're no longer interested on the waiting list. Yes?
What is the waiver?
Okay.
On the report?
All right, so the waiver is,
Back up one slide, we already got one, what
Yes.
is that? Yeah.
okay, the waiver is the iBudget waiver. It's a home and community-based services waiver, and it's the type of funding that we receive from Medicaid that allows us to provide services. And the majority of the persons who receive services from our agency, the 30,000 people that we provide services to, the funds come from the home and community-based services waiver. That specific funding that comes from the federal government with a specific state match. And, you know, we have, you know, that amount of money is finite. So, you know, the majority of the people that we provide services to receive services from the waiver. And every state has a different waiver. That's what I was talking about earlier, that some people receive services from their waiver in New York, for instance, and when they move to Florida, they think it can be translated, you know, it can transferred. But it doesn't, because every state has an individual contract with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for the provision of services in that state for their waiver.
So does
Yes.
that happen this comes into play after you come off of the waiting list?
Correct.
And
You
you're
wanna-
ready to get
you are-
services, you do this?
When we say you're on the waiting list,
Right.
you're on the waiting list for the iBudget waiver services.
So
You-
does it provide like
It provides,
medications or
it's not medical services. What we provide is home and community-based services such as companion, adult day training programs, supported employment, supported living coaching services, personal supports, some therapies, transportation to and from waiver services, and there's overall about 30-some different types of services. We don't physically provide those services to persons with disabilities, but there are vendors, there are providers, there are Medicaid providers that provide those services. We authorize those services for those providers to provide those services, basically. Yes, ma'am.
In the application, do you have to submit like your proof that they are on Medicaid, like they're getting SSI, like what's the you hand in financial stuff at the application?
We have to verify that
Okay.
they are receiving Medicaid. They have to be eligible for Medicaid, and they have to either be on SSI or Title 19 in order to be able to receive waiver services. The waiver services is a branch of Medicaid, but they have to be eligible for Medicaid. Once a person has been determined eligible for the waiver, they will automatically be eligible for Medicaid. So if they don't already receive Medicaid state plan services, once they become eligible for the waiver, then they can apply for Medicaid through the home and community waiver, and they automatically receive either SSI or Title 19, and that's what makes them eligible for the waiver. Yes.
But, yeah, to apply for the agency, you don't need to have Medicaid.
Right.
And it's not income-based.
Correct.
Anyone can apply.
While you're on the waiting list, we can provide some services through another funding source. It's basically general revenue. These are very limited funds, and they can only be approved for the current fiscal year. So for instance, if you're on the waiting list and you need a meaningful day activity in order for mom and dad to go to work. You need to go to an adult day training program, or you need a companion service. You can apply through the regional office, and if they have sufficient GR funds, they may be able to approve some to avert a crisis. Because in some cases, you need that in order to be able to, sustain a household. The parents, yes, ma'am.
But I'm just curious, how did Florida determine what conditions they were going to service? Like the 7 different conditions, and other states have other conditions, how does Florida determine that? Any idea?
How do they determine
Yeah.
to serve people with intellectual disability, autism, Phelan McDermott? Somebody went to the legislature, and it's done via our statute. So whenever a new disability is added, for example, Phelan McDermott was just added 3 years ago. Somebody went to the legislature. Somebody went to the legislature, advocated for it, and it got added to our law, to our statute books. And the same with the military provision, dependents of active duty military service members. So
So a group of advocates.
advocates. Mhm. Yes.
Because I had a parent, her child is hearing impaired,
Uh-huh.
and she thought she qualified, but she was denied.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If a person just has hearing impairment, that doesn't qualify them for that.
But
That's
she thinks she also has some autism.
okay.
But she
So
still was, I don't know if she had to prove for that.
you would have to apply under a developmental disability. If you have a hearing impairment and also have a developmental disability, you have to apply under the developmental disability in order to be determined eligible. But we don't just serve persons who are just blind or who are just, hard of hearing, or they're served by other state agencies. Yes, ma'am.
So, I'm sure there's many that fall in this category. So let's say they don't quite, meet your standards, but they're not severe, your child is too severe to live on their own without a caregiver. What agencies or what can help those people who are not qualifying? But yet, like if something happened to me tomorrow,
Yeah.
her intelligence is not enough to take care of her. She was born with malformation of the brain,
Okay.
amongst other things.
But does she not have an intellectual disability?
We're gonna decline now because of the severeness of the epilepsy, but she was not with she was able to go to school, elementary school.
Yeah. But does she
But
have an
it's like-
IQ test
Yeah.
that shows 70 or below?
Not recent. I mean, recent, I have to go back and look at it because it declined, but not enough to go under.
I gotcha.
So
So, there are services that can be provided through either the Department of Health, Children and Families, there's
Is that the
community.
under elder care, those things too?
How old is your daughter?
She's 29.
29. The Department of Elder Affairs, they will provide services to individuals with disabilities, not necessarily developmental, age 21 and over.
She definitely has developmental. I think
Over
they're gonna
21.
apply.
I'm sorry?
I think she definitely has developmental.
Okay.
So I think what I can do is apply.
Yeah.
And then if you deny someone, do you have anyone who can refer them somewhere? Like
Yeah,
that they need
your
help.
regional office should be able to provide you with local resources with information. In fact, our ineligibility notice has a section in there for the regional office to provide you with other types of resources available in your community that might be able to provide services.
Okay.
We provide, plus we have a resource information in our website. And we have the navigator on our website also, and if you click on our navigator, it shows you the different type of state agencies that provide services, and a resource directory also, and you can find that on our main
Okay.
website page, on the page,
I
on
will
the main
look
page.
into that.
Yeah, Yes,
And
ma'am.
then you said the IQ test, my son had it done like 10 years ago,
Uh-huh.
but since his IQ is declined,
Okay.
take a recent one, he's 24.
Did he have an IQ of 70 or below prior to
No.
the age of 18?
No.
Okay, then
So the IQ test has to be prior to the age of 17.
prior to the age of 18.
Or 18, yeah.
Mhm.
What was the rest of the What was the other agency?
No, they got it.
The Department of Elder Affairs.
Repeat that, please.
Department of Elder Affairs,
Thank you.
DOEA.